along with him. A woman who had suffered from severe bleeding for 12 years came up behind Jesus and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will get well." Jesus turned around and saw her and said, "Courage, my daughter, your faith has made you well." At that very moment, the woman became well. Then Jesus went into the official's house. When he saw the musicians for the funeral and the people all stirred up, he said, "Get out, everybody. The girl is not dead. She is only sleeping." And then they all started making fun of him. But as soon as the people had been put out, Jesus went to the girl's room and took hold of her hand, and she got up. The news about this spread all over that part of the country. Jesus left that place, and as he walked along, two blind men started following him. "Have mercy on us, Son of David," they shouted. When Jesus had gone indoors, the two blind men came to him, and he asked, "Do you believe that I can heal you?" "Yes, sir," they answered. Then Jesus touched their eyes and said, "Let it happen. Let it happen then, just as you believe." And their sight was restored. Jesus spoke sternly to them, "Don't tell this to anyone." But they left and spread the news about Jesus all over that part of the country. As men were leaving, some people brought to Jesus a man who couldn't talk because he had a demon. But as soon as the demon was driven out, the man started talking, and everyone was amazed. "We have never seen anything like this in Israel," they exclaimed. So we've got three stories. There's the healing of the official's daughter and the woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. That's story 1. And we've got stories 2 and 3, the healing of the two blind people and the man who can't speak. And they're linked by a common thread, which is that Jesus heals them. But I'm going to suggest there's more to this going on than it initially seems on the surface. I was recently at New Wine, which is a festival down in Somerset, and the main speaker there said a line which really struck me, which was, Jesus' miracles aren't meant to just show us the power of the power of God. They're meant to show us the purpose of God. So in these stories, Jesus is healing people, but that's not just to show that he's got the power to heal, but it's also to show us something about his purposes. And I'm going to suggest that the purposes of God through these stories are that he wants to meet with you authentically, he wants to walk with you through your pain, and he wants you to share news about him with others. So 3 points, because all good sermons should have 3 points. And I'll start with the first story. It's fairly familiar, and it actually also appears in Mark's Gospel. It's more commonly talked about from Mark's Gospel. He fills in quite a lot of details that are missing from Matthew's passage, and there's also a couple of slight differences. So in Mark's Gospel, we learn that the Jewish official has a name, and his name is Jairus. And Jairus reaches Jesus in Mark's Gospel and says, "My daughter's very sick. Please come and place your hands on her so that she'll get well." Whereas in our passage today in Matthew's Gospel, he says, "My daughter has just died. Please come and place your hands on her and she will live." It's very clearly the same story, and they're trying to emphasise different things. But what's very clear is that this man recognises that there's a problem, he recognises the solution is Jesus, and he sets about to go and fix it. My notes are stuck together. So, Jairus reaches Jesus. He says, "My daughter is sick or dead. Please come and heal her or raise her." And off they go. And on the way, they are stopped by a woman. And the woman, again, Mark's Gospel gives us a bit more detail, She says she'd been bleeding, and what Mark says is, even though she'd been treated by many doctors, she had spent all of her money, but instead of getting better, she got worse all the time. So she's clearly a woman who is absolutely desperate, and just like Jairus, she's and that's the end of the story, right? She touches Jesus, she's healed, end of, they go off to Jairus' house. No, not quite. So Matthew tells us that she touches him, she's healed. Jesus turns round and saw her and says, "Courage, my daughter, your faith has made you well." And at that very moment, the woman became well. Mark adds a little bit more detail again, and I'll go through that. So she touched his cloak and her bleeding stopped at once. And she had the feeling inside of herself that she was healed. At once, Jesus, who knew the power had gone out of him, turned round in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples answered, "You see how the people are crowding around you? Why do you ask who touched you?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who'd done it. The woman realised what had happened to her, so she came, trembling with fear, knelt at his feet, and told him the whole truth. And Jesus said to her, "My daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your trouble." It's very easy to think of this story as a woman recognises that she's got a medical condition, she touches Jesus, she's healed, end of. But that's not what the story says. The story says that Jesus turns around and has a conversation with her afterwards, and there is something powerful in that conversation that is more than just the healing. I don't know whether this kind of pro forma of conversation is one that you're familiar with. Maybe you've had it with a spouse or a friend. I'm not saying that Susie and I have these types of conversations, but I'll let you decide that. Person one says, "Hello, person two. I've got a problem. I've got such and such a problem, and I want to talk to you about it." And person two says, "Have you tried such and such a solution?" Person one says, "You're not listening to me." Person two says, "Yes, I am. You've got a problem and I'm helping you fix it." Person one then says, "I don't want because I want to tell you how it's made me feel." At that point, I am usually entirely lost. We have to start again. So there's a bit of that going on in this story. Matthew is a bit ambiguous about exactly when the woman's healed. The Greek word he uses is atmos, which just means that hour. So we know that she touches his cloak, they have a conversation, and at some point around then she's healed. That hour, she's healed. Mark is classically Mark, and he uses the most classically Mark word that there is. The Greek word is euthys, which means, does anybody know? Is Mark say, immediately. Immediately she's healed. She touches his cloak and she is immediately made well. And I think if that were me, I'd have gone, right, that's problem solved, got somewhere to be, got someone to either heal or raise, depending on exactly what state she's in at the moment, and off I'd go. But not Jesus. Jesus recognises that there's more work to be done in this woman. Mark tells us she's terrified. That's because she's ceremonially unclean. She's been a pariah for 12 years. She's full of shame, and she has brought that into a core part of how she sees herself. She's cast out from the community. And Jesus calls her out. He says to her, "Look, I see you where you're at. I see there's a problem, and I want to talk to you. I'm not just willing to let you have a physical healing. I want to bring you out in front of the community so they can see that me, someone they respect, is talking to you and restoring you to your place where you should be." And at the end of the story, after Mark has told us that she is already healed of her physical illness, the last thing Jesus says to her is, "Go and be healed of your trouble." The trouble he's talking about there can't be her physical trouble, because she's already healed of that. It's the identity that she has brought upon herself. So Jesus has met with her authentically. That's the point of the story. That if we've got a solution that we want God to fix for us, we've got a problem that we need God as the solution, God isn't just some genie that we can call on. He wants, in the solution, to meet with us and have an encounter with us and restore us to where we want to be. He wants us to be. Then off we go to Jairus' house. We know from Matthew 8, the previous chapter, that Jesus doesn't need to go. He doesn't need to go at all. In Matthew 8, there's a very familiar story to many of us, and there's a centurion comes up to Jesus and basically says, my servant's sick. Although if it was in Mark, he might be saying my servant's dead, we don't know. But anyway, he says, my servant's sick. Jesus says, shall I come and heal him? And the centurion basically goes, nah, you can do it from here. And Jesus is like, you know it, yeah, I can. And he does it, and that very hour, the servant is made well. So Jesus doesn't need to go to Jairus' house. Jairus comes to him, and he could have gone, off you go back home, she's fine, don't worry about it. But that's not what he does. He goes to Jairus' house and heals the daughter. And it's very easy, too easy, to read this story from the other side. We are now looking at the story as a story of healing. But let's walk through it in real time. Imagine being Jairus in this story. Like, this isn't a rhetorical thing. I want you to actually imagine it. You've been looking for Jesus. You're full of anxiety. Your daughter is dying or is dead. You are distraught. And you finally found Jesus. You're probably a whole mix of things. Relief, hopeful, probably still anxious, a whole mix of emotions going on. You've told him about the problem. In laying out, my daughter is sick or dead. I can't imagine he did that with any dry eyes. Jesus has come, he's agreed to come and to your house. And again, you're full of relief, possibly excitement about your daughter getting well, but probably a bit worried too. Even those of us who are most full of faith, who know Jesus can heal, when we come to him, there's always some question of, is this going to resolve how I imagine it? We do know that God works in mysterious ways. This official will have been all over the place emotionally. Then Jesus is on his way to your house, and he stops. He stops to talk to this ceremonially unclean woman. He stops while she tells him the whole truth. This isn't a quick conversation. She tells him the whole truth, the pain of the last 12 years. You're Jairus. Come on, Jesus. What are you doing? Why are you talking to this woman? Come on, woman. Finish the story. Like, my daughter is dying. I need Jesus' help now. Come on. And then Mark tells us that during that conversation, one of Jairus' servants comes and says, your daughter's dead. It's too late. Don't bother the teacher anymore. You've come to Jesus with a problem that you know he can help with, or you believe he can help with, and it's too late. He stopped to do something else, and your daughter has died. In none of the accounts does Jesus say to Jairus, don't worry, it'll all be fine. They go off to Jairus' house. And I imagine that walk between where he's healed the woman and got to Jairus' house was not a comfortable one for anyone. I can't imagine there was any small talk or any pleasantries. I imagine that conversation, that walk, happens in complete silence. What could be said? And it's so easy for us to question, if God loves us and his plan for us is for there to be no pain or suffering, and he's powerful enough to fix it all, then why doesn't he? And there's all sorts of answers to the question that people have tried over the years, but I think the answer is found in this passage. Just as in It's the same as in the passage about the woman who's been bleeding. God's purpose is to meet with us authentically. Every time there is pain and suffering, there is an opportunity for care and compassion. We're called to love people and to intercede for them, to meet them in their suffering, to bring their troubles before God. There's a growing process in coming back to God time and time again, in unanswered prayers, searching for answers in the long dark night of the soul, where healing hasn't yet come. You've seen a loved one pass away. You're going through troubles. And Jesus could have helped, but he seems distracted or absent in some way, and you don't know what's going on. That is the reality for Jairus at that point. And Jesus walks with him through the pain. He never stands aloof from pain. He came to the earth to endure the worst possible pain and suffering in order to spend eternity with us in glory. And that's his purpose, is to be with us in our pain so that we can spend eternity with him. There's always another side. We are at the other side of Jairus' story. There is another side to our pain and suffering that we see. If at the moment you are in the position of Jairus pre-healing, and you've got unanswered prayers or questions, and you're going through suffering, then cling, white-knuckled, to the blood-born promises of Jesus, that there is another side. You will look back in hindsight, maybe from glory, and see the answer and see the purpose. You might think that that's sermon over and I'm going to finish here, but I did specifically ask Ali whether he wanted me to preach on the whole passage or just half of it, and he said, no, you've got to do it all, so we're halfway through. He did also warn me that the children would be in and I should keep it light, so just an apology that this next bit gets a little bit heavy. This next bit's lighter than the bit that's just gone before. So Jesus has been going around, he's been healing people, and people know that he's been healing people. And he comes across two blind men and one dumb man. And ladies, dumb man is not a tautology. This man couldn't speak to the demon. And once again, he heals them all, and Matthew tells us, Jesus spoke to them sternly. Don't tell this to anyone. And there's a few times that he does this in the Gospels, and it seems like quite a strange thing to do. It can't be that he doesn't want people to know who he is, because Bob told us last week that he announces himself as the bridegroom, and people at the time would have known that means God, so he is clearly telling people who he is. So that can't be why he says don't tell anyone. And I also don't think it can be because he doesn't want people to know that he can heal, because, again, the purpose of God is to bring wholeness and healing. So I don't think he wants to not heal people. So it's a bit of an odd thing for him to say. He spoke to them sternly. Don't tell anyone about this. And I think the answer to why, again, is found in the passage. And I'll come on to that in a second. A few years ago, Susie and I saw the comedian James Acaster, and he told a story about his ex-girlfriend. But before he gave the anecdote, he said, look, I'm a professional comedian. I'm about to tell you quite a funny story, but please don't repeat the story. Please don't retell it. And I'm not going to retell the story. But he said, look, I've spent hours crafting this story, using all the nuance that I want in the story to put it there. If you retell it, I guarantee you won't put as much care into the telling of the story as I have, and I'll come across as bitter and twisted, but that's not who I am. I've crafted the story in a specific way, so please don't retell it. And I think that might be what's going on here. Jesus is saying, look, I've healed you, but that's not what it's about. It's not about the healing. If you retell this, you'll just tell people we've met a healer. But that's not who I am. Please don't spread that message. because I am so much more than that, and I don't want my purposes to get lost. And the reason I think that we can understand that from the passage is at the very end of the passage. It says that the Pharisees said it's the chief of demons who gives Jesus the power to drive out demons. They've seen what's going on and they've misinterpreted it. They've completely missed the point. They haven't seen all that Jesus goes on to do. They've only seen a bit of it and they've misinterpreted. So Jesus is saying, look, if you go around saying that I've healed you, people will think of me as a healer, or they'll think I'll get that power from somewhere else. I'm so much more than that. I am God. But notwithstanding his stern warning, the people left and spread the news about Jesus all over that part of the country. And wouldn't it be great if every Sunday the news from the front of church here was that people have been spreading news about Jesus all over this part of the country. And people come to Jesus then, but now it seems really difficult. It seems really difficult to do that. 2,000 years ago, Jesus says, don't tell people about me, but they can't help themselves, they go and do it anyway. Now, God says to us, do go out and make disciples, do go and tell people, and come and meet him too. I don't put in the hard yards as I should, and I think that's probably true of many of us here. And I'm not trying to be judgmental, as I say, I don't put the hard yards in either. But we don't have the same excuse that they had then. Jesus says to them, don't tell people about me because they might misunderstand. We don't have that excuse now. The end of John 20 tells us that the things that are written in the Gospels are written because there's enough there for people to believe. Jesus did many more miracles, but what I've written here is enough for you to believe. So we don't have we know he can change our lives. He can heal us. Let's not keep that to ourselves. Just as he wants to meet us authentically, he wants to walk with us through our pain. He wants that for other people who don't yet know him too. So, as we draw to a close, I want to invite the ministry team to go to the back and invite everyone else for prayer. And there's 5 things that you might want prayer for. I know there's only 3 points, but there's 5 things that you might want prayer for. 1, healing. If you need healing, we'll pray with you. If you want to know God's presence and to meet with him authentically, maybe it's been a while since you've heard his voice, again, feel free to go and get prayer. If you're struggling with unanswered prayer and you're in the situation of Jairus before Jesus heals his daughter, again, go to the back. If you want boldness or opportunity to tell people about him, and the final thing is anything else at all. So they're the 5 things. So if you want prayer for anything at all, one of those first 4, or anything else, please go and get prayer. God does want to meet with you. That's evidenced in every story we've gone through today. So please go and get healing. I'm going to hand back to the band, unless Ali wants to say anything beforehand. He doesn't, so I will hand back to the band. Thanks.
Whether we're going